Hello there. Today I'm lucky enough to be tasting a wine from Chassagne Montrachet. It's a Premier Cru wine. It's from a producer called Philippe Colin. It's 2018 vintage, and this is his Premier Cru Les Chaumees. It has a subsidiary title here of Clos Saint Abdon. So Domaine Philippe Colin was founded in 2004 in Chassagne Montrachet. Today, Philippe has 5 hectares of vines. I think he'd actually built the domain up to 12 hectares, but in 2021, he passed the other 7 hectares over to his son Simon to manage and to make the wines from. Now, Philippe started working for his family's business, Domaine Colin-Deléger, back in 1988, just completed his studies in viticulture and enology and came to work with his parents. In 1995, they were joined there by his brother Bruno, and the two brothers worked together until their parents, Bernadette and Michel, retired in 2003. The brothers decided at that stage that they'd split the 18-hectare domain between the two of them. Today, Philippe also makes wine in South Africa, where he has a brand called Terroir, based in Franschhoek. The advantage being that in South Africa they harvest in February, but I think his involvement in South Africa is the reason he's scaled down his holdings in Burgundy. In the vineyards, they employ an approach called the lutte raisonnée. And the lutte raisonnée is, I suppose, a halfway step towards organics. You're not actually saying that you won't use chemical pesticides or fungicides, but what you'll do is you'll monitor your vineyards very carefully, and you'll only apply these sprays where and when they're necessary. So you're not spraying the whole vineyard preventatively, you're simply reacting to a problem, and you're using careful monitoring to establish where that problem is and to make sure that you act quickly to remove it. So yes, the lutte raisonnée, the rational struggle. Now, Les Chaumees is a Premier Cru that borders the commune of Saint-Aubin to the north. It's one of the highest vineyards in the appellation. I think it's the highest of the Premier Crus. It sits above a Premier Cru called Les Vergers. Now, I mentioned the fact that this has a sort of a sub-labelling of Clos Saint Abdon. Now, the Clos Saint Abdon is a central portion of Les Chaumees, and you'd expect a wine labelled as being from a clos to come from a vineyard that's walled. Evidently the walls no longer exist, but the central section is still fairly easy to identify because it has quite shallow soils that have a higher limestone content than clay. So there's quite calcareous soils. And the result of that is you get quite a pungent mineral style from the wine and bracing acidity. The vines that Philippe Colin has in this section of Clos Saint Abdon are 50 years old, so there's a wonderful concentration coming from the fruit from these old vines, giving low yields. Now, Philippe Colin is very careful to avoid over-ripeness. Everything is picked by hand, so they can be very selective. The fruit is very gently pressed using a pneumatic press and goes into tank, where fermentation is allowed to start using indigenous yeasts, using the yeasts that have come into the winery on the fruit or that were already present in the winery. Now, once the must is fermenting, it's transferred into barrels, about 25% of which are new. These are going to be French oak. As of 2021, Philippe Colin has taken the approach to only use 500 litre barrels, but in 2018 he was still using 228 litre barriques alongside some 500 litre barrels, I believe some 400 and some 450 litre barrels as well, possibly. So increasingly the domain is trying to scale back the amount of oak it's using on its wines, but it's not actually a particularly high proportion anyway. They work with 5 different cooperages, and the oak that is used is a fine-grained, medium toast French oak. The wine ages for between 10 and 15 months, and it ages with its lees with regular batonnage. The wine is then lightly filtered into bottle, and we're told bottling is done entirely by gravity. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? Looking at the colour, we have a lovely, bright, vibrant, medium yellow colour there. Swirling it, the wine is labelled as having 13.5% alcohol and is sticking fairly readily to the side of the glass. It's forming some quite noticeable tears. So let's have a look at the aromas, shall we? Well, the aromas are complex and they're toasty. There's a lot going on there. There's a creamy, leesy note. There's toastiness coming from oak, and there's toastiness, I think, coming from that indigenous fermentation. There's something slightly earthy about the whole thing. Again, I think those are fermentation notes. But then there's a lovely rich peach fruit underlying the whole thing. There are citric notes and a lovely creaminess as well. So let's have a taste. The wine's got an excellent intensity and richness. Those toasty notes, initially perhaps the fermentation notes, the sort of gunpowdery, gunflint sort of notes, are right at the front, and behind that you've got cedary notes, you've got touches of vanilla. It's very well integrated with lovely, rich, ripe stone fruit notes, but yet those notes manage to retain some lovely delicacy, and you see it alongside the sort of the mineral and the citric notes on the finish. From the mid palate through to the finish, you're starting to see those notes of creaminess. The alcohol is perhaps giving a little bit of warmth, but it certainly isn't standing out. There's enough fruit that's nicely in balance, and that mineral acidity is giving the wine lovely length. There's some wonderful mineral notes there as well, almost as if there's a layer of perhaps crushed seashell, and certainly there's a saline element as well. There's plenty going on here. This is a 6-year-old wine, but it still feels as if it's got lovely, youthful zestiness, such as the freshness of the acidity. The wine is medium bodied, the richness on the mid palate is lasting quite nicely, but then the elegance of the finish is very impressive. I'm perhaps wary of allowing Burgundy to age for too long, but I think I'd be quite happy to keep this for another 5 and possibly 10 years. And I think you will see it develop more sort of toasty complexity and richness. Its acidity is good, it's retaining its freshness, so that would suggest to me that it should age really nicely. Looking at the Wine Searcher aggregated score for this, it gets a 92 out of 100. I actually feel it's been slightly hard done by that. Sometimes the act of aggregating can pull a score down, and I think that may have been the case in this, because most of the scores this is getting a 92 and above. There's just one score I can see in our set that pulls it down, and I think that's a pity. But certainly I think this is a lovely example of a really good Chassagne Montrachet. It's got beautiful tension, it's got focus, and it's got good acidity. So yes, a very enjoyable wine. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. If you'd like to watch more of our videos, it would be fantastic if you would sign up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you can set yourself an alert and you can get a notification every time we publish a new video. If you have any comments, please pop those in the comments box below. We'd be very interested to hear what your feedback is on the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else relating to that. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please feel free to pass it on. We'd really appreciate your endorsement on that. I will leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this particular vintage of this wine, so you can see if and when it's available near you, what its pricing is. You can have a look at some of the background notes we've got on the winemaking. You can see the region, the grape variety. You can reference producer information. You can see things like price history, critics, notes, scores, awards it's won. Hopefully all the information you should need about this one. So thank you so much for joining us, and I do hope you'll manage to make some time and come and join us for another tasting in the very near future. Bye for now.